Hi, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to talk about my November TBR. Now, I'm really excited today because I actually got through all of the books on my October TBR and several books beyond that. Well, several is probably an exaggeration, but at least a couple books beyond that, as you'll see in my October wrap-up. Now, part of that was because 4 of the books were a lot shorter, and I did, wow, DNF a book. Probably the first time I've DNF'd a book in years. But I'm getting better at that. Quick pause to take the hair down. Didn't want it up. In November, hopefully this month, no, not hopefully, I'm definitely going to finish that goal I set for myself back in, I believe, August, to finish all of the books on my Goodreads TBR that I had added to my TBR back in 2012. It started off with a really long number. I don't even remember what that number was, but I weeded it down by, first off, what books were available at my library, and then secondly, by really being judicious about the books that I would pick up. And even as I was preparing this TBR, I went through, I added the books to the list, and when I picked one of them up from the library, saw a shirtless muscly man on the front, it was supposed to be a YA steampunk, I went, probably not going to read this one. And so when I looked at the back of it, I'm like, no, not going to read this one. So that's not even a DNF. That's a did not pick up. That's a I'm taking off the TBR before I even put it on. So I have only about, if I counted right, 8 books, maybe 7 left from that put on my list in 2012 goal. Yes. So excited about that. Which means I had to step up what I was adding to that list. And I think my TBR might change a little bit throughout the month because I'm a little intrigued to maybe read through one of Goodreads' categories of nonfiction for their Best Books of the Year award. If they'd had it out by now, I would have put that on my November TBR. That'll probably be December. First goal, finish those books that were on my TBR, my Goodreads TBR set back in 2012. Yes, I know, 9 years. And so I'll go through some of those books. And then goal number 2, I've decided after watching a lot of Daniel Green and Murphy about Wheel of Time and seeing clips from the upcoming Amazon Prime show, I need to read Wheel of Time. Now, granted, it's been on my list and it's actually just about 15-20 books down on the list, so I would have gotten to it. I'm just bumping it up a little bit. So I did end up purchasing this one because it was a really long wait on the library copy. Obviously, there's a lot of hype. I figured it would be. So I went ahead and purchased this one. If I really like it, yes, I'm going to purchase the rest of them. So I want to read this one this month. This one there was no wait for from my library, so hopefully I'll be able to get through these 2 in the month of November. I also have book 3 on hold through my library because it's been said that some of book 3 is in the first season of the show, and I'm a big proponent of reading the book before watching the movie or TV show. So those are chunkers, but I do have a little bit of vacation coming up, you know, Thanksgiving. Don't know how much I'll get read, but I'm optimistic. Now, some of the books that are on my list but to finish what was on my list from 2012, this one is American Nations. So this is a telling of the history of the United States by looking at the different parts of the country as their own quote-unquote nation, like the Deep South or Yankeedom or El Norte. At least that's what I'm reading from the back. So I'm a little intrigued. It wasn't what I thought of at first, but this does intrigue me. Next, I have Maya Angelou's iconic I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings collection of poetry. I'm not necessarily a huge poetry reader. I read some. It's not necessarily my first go-to, but Maya Angelou's talent rises above pretty much anyone else, so this will undoubtedly be a good read. Next, I have a work of history, The Burgermister's Daughter. And I put this on my list in 2012 because I was taking Reformation in grad school, a history of the Reformation class. And this is Tale of Scandal in a 16th century German town. I love history. I love learning more about women in history and how they were treated. So this seems like it will be pretty interesting. Then we have 1775, a good year for a revolution. Of course, everyone thinks of 1776 as the year for the American Revolution. So this is taking just a step back and looking at the events that laid the groundwork for the groundbreaking Declaration of Independence that was published in 1776, obviously. You don't have a declaration like that coming unless there was stuff that led up to it. Now, as I've mentioned before in another wrap-up about another book about this topic, I believe it was the first quarter century of the US as a nation. I've read a lot in this time period, so there's not a lot quote-unquote new for me. So when I read books like this, it's to look at how is the author portraying, like what tactic of history, how does he craft his narrative, or she, unfortunately it's more he. So that's what I look for in books like this. So when I first reserved this book, I was thinking that it was more about the Cousins' War as the War of the Roses and the 100 Years' War is sometimes referred to. But no, this is another look at the lead up to the American Revolution, and it looks at some of the familial relational ties. This is one that I'm going to approach with not necessarily a predisposition to DNF, but because I've read so much about this era, unless this brings something new, I'm not spending an enormous amount of time on this one. And of course, I just realized it's written by the same guy as 1775. So we shall see. If I read 1775, finish it, but don't like his style, definitely not picking this one up. So this is a maybe on the TBR. The next book on my list is, I guess you could call it in the memoir format, but it's not necessarily. It's called The Pleasures of Reading in the Age of Distraction. Obviously, for someone who loves reading and yet is also easily distracted, I read the synopsis of this and went, I probably will most definitely be interested and intrigued by this. Next we have Return to the Willows, which is a sequel written by a different author, but a sequel to Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. I'm always a little bit wary when a different author writes a sequel years or decades or longer after the original, but I did my research, I followed up on it, and it seems like the author did a really good job in capturing the same whimsy that Kenneth Grahame did with Wind in the Willows. So this should be a short, easy, and hopefully whimsical read. And we have Invisibility, which is a YA, I don't know whether to call it, it's a bit fantastical because it's got invisibility, but it's not sci-fi or anything like that, but it is a little bit of a romance. The boy is invisible, trying not to be invisible, and the one person who can see him is this girl, and they're probably most definitely gonna fall in love, but we'll see. If it's a quick read, if it's nothing too terrible, I'll finish it. I'm a little wary of romance books, but we'll see how this one goes. Then we have two books that are on that are read-alongs for Murphy's Patreon. Well, one of them did get bumped to be a December read-along because of the book shortage, but a lot of things are getting delayed, and so the original, the read for December is going to be The Bone Shard Emperor, and I already had The Bone Shard Daughter on my to-read list, and since I want to do the read-along, obviously I'm going to read, I bumped up The Bone Shard Daughter on my TBR to November instead of, I don't know when I would have gotten to it because I just put it on my TBR. So that way I've read the first book in the series and can hopefully, when Bone Shard Emperor comes out, read that one. Bone Shard Daughter is a fantasy the main character has lost some of her memories, and she's the emperor's daughter. And she's trying to recapture these memories so that she can learn the bone shard magic, which she has to have to inherit the throne. But bone shard magic is it's very destructive of the people whose bones are taken to be used in this magic. They take the bones from a little place from behind their ear, and when the magic is used using that particular bone, that person suffers bone shard magic sickness. I'm really intrigued by it, and I've heard really good things about it, and there are multiple perspectives in it as well. So I'm intrigued for that one. The other Patreon book, the read-along buddy read, I always forget the words for that, is The Black Tides of Heaven. So I don't know much about this. It is YA, it is fantasy, and the two main characters, whose names I'm not going to try to pronounce because I'll probably mispronounce them, but the two main characters are twins, and they have from birth been promised to this monastery that I guess helps them develop their gifts. But one of them, it's a prophetic gift, and she, I believe it's the girl, she's something coming, a rebellion is coming, and things are going wrong, and it's all intriguing. That's literally all I know about it, but just use the word intriguing. But I'm intrigued to read this book as well. The next two books are nonfiction. I'm not 100% sure whether or not I am going to read this next one, and that's American Fundamentalism. Although I love learning intellectually about various things, having grown up in a very fundamentalist culture, environment, school, upbringing, it's not necessarily something that brings back fond memories for me. But once I get the book from the library, I'm willing to try to set that aside and see if I can intellectually learn from this book. The other one I am really intrigued by. It's set during around World War II era. It's nonfiction. So it says Troublesome Young Men, and it's about the people that helped bring Winston Churchill to the Prime Minister's position right at the outbreak of World War II. Now, Churchill was not a popular man. He was very brash. He was not someone easy to get along with, and there was a reason why. He was basically a backbencher with a loud voice, but somehow after Chamberlain's disgrace, he ends up as Prime Minister and one of the most loved, at least in retrospect, Prime Ministers of Great Britain. And this is all about who helped him get to that position, because he couldn't do it all by himself. Now the last two are fiction. Crown Duel, based just on the cover, I'm not super interested in it. Again, it's a fight for a kingdom, it's YA, it's fantasy. Okay, we'll see if they can bring something new to this. The last one is called The Queen of Water, and I'm really intrigued by it because I do have an affinity with Ecuador, and the main character in this is a Quechua girl. Now, the Quechua people are descended from the Incas. In Ecuador, they're called Quechua, and in Peru, they're called Quichua, but they are both descended from the very powerful Incan Empire. They are looked down on because a lot of the Quechua, they never intermarried, and the indigenous cultures were looked down on. And this particular girl, she is sent from her mountain village to work as an indentured servant to a wealthy, prosperous mestizo family. And so this is a family with more European connections. And I don't know necessarily because I don't have the book here with me, but I believe it's probably historical fiction as well, just from the fact that she's an indentured servant. So I'm really intrigued because I absolutely love Ecuador and really wish that I could go back because it's been about 10 years. And so those are the books that I have on my TBR for November. I've got a few really, really big books, so I'm not adding more even though I could. If I do finish all the books on my TBR, which I will need to so that I can get to my yearly goal of 200 books, but if I do finish those, Then I'm going to continue on with my TBR piles, the books that I own but haven't read yet, which is a lot larger than it usually is. So that brings me to the end of my November TBR. It's getting really ambitious, but I'm really loving this idea of digging into the books, really enjoying them, planning it out, and just reinvigorating my love for reading. I would love to know what you think of any of these books. Have you read them before? Do you have any thoughts? Do you have any advice? Should I read them? Should I skip them? I would love to discuss this with you in the comments. So thanks so much for joining me. I'll see you in the next one.